Today is our last session around high leverage practices, and we are going to talk specifically about one high leverage practice, which is all about systematically designing instruction. So we're going to come about this from the perspective of designing specially designed instruction for students with disabilities, and then talk a little bit about the accommodations and modifications that we provide in order to really level that playing field for students and help them to be more successful, help them overcome their barriers within the classroom. Again, I can't see your faces, but I have my chat open so I can see the chat. And then if you unmute and you want to share that way through your microphone, that's fine too. So just make sure that you're chatting or using your mic. I can't get any of those nonverbals or the head nods or shakes or anything like that today. So I appreciate you keeping me in the loop through the chat and through the mic. All right, so here's what I would like for all of you to get out of today's session. I want you to be able to define and provide examples of specially designed instruction at the end of today. I want you to be able to define and provide examples of accommodations and modifications. And I want you to be able to identify considerations for planning and implementing SDI and when providing accommodations and modifications. So some of you might be thinking, Special Ed 101, I got this, I know this. Absolutely. I think there's going to be much that you can contribute to the conversation. But when we talk about specially designed instruction and we talk about accommodations and modifications, remembering that we're doing this on a consistent basis. And some of these high leverage practices and systematically designing instruction is really just reminders to you all that these are things that need to be done on a regular basis and really to validate the work that you're putting in. So hopefully you will leave with some processes that can help you within your current position and maybe different perspectives on some of the topics that we're going to talk about. But I do completely recognize that you have foundational knowledge of both SDI and accommodations and modifications today. So I hope to just provide you with some resources that you can utilize, in addition to giving you some new information today. So let's show what you know. We're going to do this in a waterfall style, which means that you are going to enter A, B, or C based on what you think the correct answer is, but don't put it in the chat just yet. I will say 1, 2, 3, go, and then you can add it to the chat all at the same time so that we can see what people's answers are. So in what year was specially designed instruction, or SDI, required by law for students eligible to receive special education services? Do you think it is A, 1975, with the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, Public Law 94-142? Do you think it is B, 1990, with IDEA? Or do you think it wasn't until 2004 with the reauthorization of IDEA? Okay, go ahead and enter into the chat. 1, 2, 3, send. Okay, so Tracy, Shannon, Alicia, we have some A's. We have a C coming in, a B, some different answers all along the way. Lisa has an S. I'm not sure where she got that, but I think she was going with A. Okay, we have some C's. All right. So the answer, for all of you wondering, because there was some mixed answers within the chat, is actually A. So specially designed instruction has been a term that has been around since 1975 within Public Law 94-142. So you will notice that in the language, the term special education means specially designed instruction. So those terms can be used interchangeably. And for those students who require special education, they require specially designed instruction to be available to them. Now, since then, there has been additional information added to the definition of specially designed instruction, not to the point where it tells you exactly what to do for students, which I don't think any of you would necessarily want. It's definitely still a law that's left up to interpretation, but we're going to break down the law to begin today's conversation around SDI and really talk about what are the three whats and the 3 Ys of SDI based on the federal definition. So before I actually show you the definition, in the chat, if you think you know any of the whats, go ahead and place that in the chat now. The whats of SDI. What does the teacher have to do in terms of specially designed instruction? Any guesses? All right, that's okay. No guesses for the whats. How about the whys behind SDI? Any guesses for the whys? Why do we have to provide specially designed instruction? Okay, well then let me give you a prompt. Here's the definition directly pulled from IDEA. I want you to go ahead and tell me what you think the whats are now that you can see the definition. Okay, so Tracy says to allow kids to access school or curriculum. Absolutely, that's in here. What does the teacher have to do when it comes to providing specially designed instruction? All right, so make changes to the curriculum and instruction. Nice. Shannon, changes to content, methodology, and delivery. Nice. Okay, so the what, Shannon nailed it. The what is adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. Now let's look at the why. Going back to what Tracy said, accessing the curriculum. Why else do we need to provide specially designed instruction for students who are eligible to receive services? We have one of them, but we know there's 3. So the one is access. Okay, to prevent frustration and limit behaviors. You're not wrong, Samantha, but that's not one that's within the definition. Okay, we have access. Good, Lisa, to address student needs. So every student's those unique needs under that Roman numeral I. To help students be successful in meeting their goals. Great. Not included within the definition though. So we have access, we have unique needs. What's the last one? Oh, Tracy got it. To meet educational standards. So let's review really quickly. The what is in blue, as Shannon told us. As a special education teacher, when we're designing instruction for our students, we have the ability to adapt the content, the methodology, and the delivery. That's what we are going to do. Then when we talk about why do we need to do this for students who are eligible to receive services, is because 1, we have to address their unique needs. Legally, we have to address their unique needs. We have to ensure they have access to the general education curriculum, which we got right off the beginning. And it's so that the child can meet the educational standards. And these words were pretty intentional, especially that last one about meeting the educational standards. So we have a small percentage of students who might be working towards an alternative assessment, who might be working on content connectors, who may not meet those educational standards. But specially designed instruction for the majority of all of our learners are really looking at meeting educational standards and how are we providing instruction so that students are able to meet the educational standards. Remember, we are always presuming competence, whether that's for students who are included within the general education environment all day, or even students who are in a more of a functional life skills types program. We always need to presume competence and expose them to the content within their grade level. So as we're looking here, those are the 3 whys of SDI. So now that we've broken down the definition a little bit, let's continue to talk about each of those words. So adapting the content is really adapting what students are learning. So just as we just talked about within the definition, students with disabilities are expected to master the same standards as their classmates without disabilities. Now, the nice part for special education teachers are the standards can often be met by learning different content. Always go back to what is the learning target when we're talking about designing instruction for students, because we're starting here and we need to get here, but the path we take might look very different, but our end goal is the same. So when you're thinking about adjusting or adapting the content in order for our learners to be more successful, always think, what's the end goal? And what do I have to do to get to the end goal? And how it can look different based on our students' needs and what our students' strengths are and what our areas of weakness are, and how can we address that within the content that we're providing. So the content really is the what. That's one aspect that we can change in order to provide that specially designed instruction to our students. Another aspect that can be changed, of course, is the methodology, and this is how students are being taught. So when we think methodology, we're thinking the instruction, the strategies, the intervention or techniques that are put in place. And we know that there are specific methodologies that are more effective or efficient for students with disabilities based on research. We know that if we're looking up early childhood classrooms, that we might find specific research on what interventions work best at that level for kids diagnosed with autism in the early childhood setting. These strategies might work best. We might have another intervention that might work best for high school students who have a reading disability. And there's research based around what's going to take place. Sometimes they're evidence-based practices with all of the meta-analysis that go along with it to say this is what's best. Other times they're high leverage practices that are proven to be most effective for students. So thinking about Anita Archer and thinking about looking at I do, we do, you do. We know direct, explicit instruction is more successful with students with disabilities than more of an inquiry-based model or learning in a different way. So if I'm going to change how students are being taught, I might think about direct, explicit instruction over an inquiry model. And if the general education teacher is using that inquiry model, this might be how I change and provide specially designed instruction to the students with whom I'm working with. And just because we have to do this for students with disabilities doesn't mean that it won't benefit all learners within the classroom. So how can we adjust and be open to other individuals joining our small groups as well if we're in the general education environment? So methodology based on the research behind specific eligibility categories and other considerations, and how do we make those changes so that our students can master the standards within the classroom. And the last what is the delivery of instruction. So when and where students are taught. So we talked a little bit about students being educated alongside their peers in the general education classroom. As you know, some students might learn best in more of a separate setting, depending on the situation. So do we have an occupational therapy room, a counselor's office that they're going to receive that type of instruction? Ensuring that generalization of skills are taught over time as well. If we are pulling out, how are we getting students back in and being able to show those skills in other environments as well? But group size might also be a context of the delivery of instruction that we're changing. Maybe the dosage is different. They're getting additional instruction. Think of that double block of math, that double block of language arts. Think about pre-teaching vocabulary or giving students background knowledge that maybe they don't have in order for them to be successful during the lesson with their general education peers. So what does the delivery of instruction look like? So our three whats, we start with our content, then we look at our methodology and our delivery of instruction. You can change one out of the three. You could change all of the three dependent upon the goals and the instruction within the classroom that the student's working towards. So let's talk about what SDI is not. So it's not something that is taking place in Tier 1 for all students necessarily. We're looking at differentiation, universal design for learning. Those are things that we're doing for all students within the classroom, and we want our students absolutely to participate in all of those things as well. But SDI is something that is specially designed for that student's needs, and we're providing that support for that student. It's not homework help. It's not looking specifically at what was done in the class that day and just repeating it. It's not that content support. Remember, it's thinking of what are the students' barriers and what instruction do they need to overcome those barriers. And it's more than just providing accommodations and modifications. It's that instructional piece. It's what the teacher does in order to help the student overcome the barriers. So when we're looking at who can provide specially designed instruction, oftentimes special ed teachers are the ones who are designing this instruction and determining what's best. Special ed teachers aren't necessarily supposed to be the content experts, but their job is to really be the individual who has the knowledge base of these are the instructional strategies that are going to work best for the student. Here's some scaffolds and supports that need to be put in place for the student to be successful. But once that's designed and once that's determined for the student, the general education teacher can absolutely implement the specially designed instruction and be the one who is either a lead teacher or co-teacher in that aspect. So it is not just the responsibility of a special education teacher. If you're only co-teaching one period a day, or if you are only have a pull-out model 30 minutes, and then they're in the 90-minute reading block the rest of the time, maybe at the elementary level, you can't possibly provide all the specially designed instruction that student needs. So we have to convey that with the general education teacher so that we're working more collaboratively and there's this shared responsibility so that our students are instructed the best to meet their needs at all times throughout their educational day. The other thing, we know that our paraprofessionals are very valuable to us. And really considering and thinking about how are we best utilizing our paraprofessionals in order to work with students with disabilities or other at-risk learners, and just making sure that they are working under the direction of the special ed teacher or the general education teacher to provide those services. But really, the instruction can come from any of those individuals. And we really want to promote this sense that it is not one person's responsibility. It does not fall all on the special ed teacher's shoulders. How can we work together collaboratively to best meet the needs of our learners? So we need to make sure that specially designed instruction is research-based and data-driven. I touched on this a little bit before, but really thinking about the considerations of the eligibility category of the student. What is the student's disability? Is there research base that it's helpful, or this intervention or instructional strategy is helpful for this specific type of learning disability? Age of the student is important. If it's effective for elementary but not high school, then maybe if it works, great, but we need to look at the research base behind it before we try those things out. Think of the setting. Is this effective in a general education setting? Is it more effective in a small group? Is it more effective one-on-one? What is the research base behind it? What's the subject area that needs to be addressed, or even specific skills? On the next slide, we're going to talk about the possible domains of SDI. And really, when we talk about specially designed instruction, it can be in any of these areas. So when we're looking here, we have academics. Of course, we know that students who have individualized education programs, we have focus sometimes on reading and math and writing most of the time, right? And we're going to have specially designed instruction on our academic areas. But also think about all of the other areas that potentially maybe are a barrier to students being successful academically. So think about organizational skills, executive function skills. Think about their behaviors within the classroom. How are we designing instruction in all of those areas where they might have goals? What does it look like to provide technology to a student? And how are we teaching to that? Just handing over a graphic organizer or just handing over an iPad is not specially designed instruction. We have to teach them how to use the graphic organizer or how to arrange the content within the graphic organizer so that it's meaningful to them. And we have to teach them how to use the technology so that it is able to benefit them in their academic setting. So think of all of these areas and even more potentially that students struggle with or that they have goals around. All of these can be the subject matter for specially designed instruction. So think about what's hindering their ability to be successful in their education and what do we need to teach to in order for them to overcome that barrier. So any of these areas could be applicable. We have an SDI checklist that you can go through and look at. Look at your current IEPs, look what's available to students, look what you're providing, and go through and just validate what you're currently doing, or maybe find areas that you can potentially improve the specially designed instruction that you have in place. So as you're looking at your SDI, different categories that I want you to look for is one, it needs to be individualized. We talked about that from the definition based on the unique needs of the student. So in order to ensure that's taking place, is it aligned with the student's present levels of performance? Are we considering their starting point when we're designing instruction for them? Are we looking at the goals that are written within the IEP? And I'm not saying we need to teach to the goals every single day of every single lesson, but how are the goals integrated within the general curriculum, and how do we make time to teach to those goals as well? Looking at the research-based or evidence-based behind the SDI, how did you come up with that type of instruction? How did you change the content based on the research? How did you change the methodology based on the research? And then how did you potentially change the instructional delivery based on the research? Remember, this is something that the teacher's doing. So how is the teacher providing this type of instruction? What does it look like? And I think this is the part where it becomes a little bit, maybe you need to look and do a self-assessment of, is it systematically done over time? So we're planning it based on data. It's delivered over time. We're documenting that it takes place, and we're evaluating it based on data. Because there's no doubt in my mind that you all are doing what needs to be done to help students overcome the barriers to their learning. But are we documenting it? Are we progress monitoring it to see if it's working? And if not, are we changing instruction? So that's the piece that sometimes is left out, and making sure that we are systematically designing it and taking data on it over time and checking it off the list to ensure that it's happening for our students. I think that process is easier and more of a pull-out type model when you're able to go ahead and check all of those things off. But we know that students benefit more for being in the general education classroom. So how are we designing our instruction that's taking place within the general education context? If you're co-teaching, what does that look like on a daily basis? How are you integrating that? And I'm going to give you some strategies to help plan for that as well. But I think, we said this has been in law since 1975, but I think the big focus on SDI now we're looking at it through a different lens. We're looking at providing this instruction when students are fully integrated within the general education setting. And how are we doing that? And how are we putting this into place over time? And that has become a new focus. We need to make sure that the instruction is needed by the student with the disability. Remember, specially designed instruction is what makes special education special. So thinking through, okay, this is what is needed for this student to be successful within the education setting. And without this, they would not be able to accomplish what we want them to accomplish. It definitely needs to look at what those barriers or deficits are in order for them to be able to overcome those and reach those grade level standards as we talked about. And then skill transfer and maintenance needs to be a part of it. So if you are providing this instruction in a separate setting, what are we doing to ensure that maintenance and skill transfer happens for students? If you want them to not only show it within the general education environment, but out in the community, what are we doing to transfer those skills? And how are we teaching through that? How is that built into the instruction that we're providing over time? So this is your little checklist that you can go through and look at students' IEPs, or as you're writing in specially designed instruction within your IEPs, think about these things and how this is going to take place within your day-to-day practice. So some of the other things that I think it's easy to wrap our head around, different examples, is we often think of packages or comprehensive programs that are specially designed instruction. So I'm sure these names are not foreign to you. We have Wilson Reading, Orton Gillingham, Read 180, Touch Math, specific programs meant to address academic needs of students. And those are absolutely research-based and specially designed for students with disabilities, and something that you can absolutely be doing in terms of systematically planning for that instruction for students. But as I'm sure your administrators will tell you, we never want to write a package or program within an IEP. It is fine to put a phonics program or structured phonics literacy program within the IEP. But in case Orton Gillingham goes away tomorrow within your district, you don't want to have that within the IEP. So structured phonics literacy, that would be fine, but no specific programming. But you don't have to have packages or programs in order to provide SDI. Just simple integrated practices. So at a macro level, we talked about direct explicit instruction. This is how this child is going to learn best. Some students do best with modeling. And I believe that was an example that somebody threw in the chat earlier. Chaining, task analysis. So those practices, again, that are research-based for students with disabilities, can be helpful, and we can do them frequently over time. We can help our students be able to break down their own task and create a task analysis. We can teach them that process. That teaching is specially designed instruction. Look at our instructional techniques or strategies. Are we using mnemonics? Are we using differential reinforcement for behavior? Are we looking at visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile ways, that multisensory instruction that we're providing to students? All of those strategies are research-based. When is it happening? And I know those are things that you're doing, but go back to that. Are we documenting it? Do we have that in place? And how are we showing that it's working over time through data? Even increased instructional intensity. We're going to give the students 30 minutes more of this. That is SDI. We're going to break down the steps problem by problem to say, here's how you do each problem. We're going to give students more review. All of those are examples of specially designed instruction. So packages and comprehensive programs are great, but a lot of good teaching is research-based for students with disabilities and is SDI. We just have to make sure that we're systematically providing that to our students. So I think this is where it gets to be a little bit tricky. SDI definitely is intended to address the student's IEP goals, but we have so many things that students need to do throughout a school year, and we don't write hundreds of goals within an IEP. We focus on what's most important. So how do we take what's most important within the student's goals and see how it fits within the general education curriculum to show this is a barrier to your learning, this is a goal that you're working towards, and here's how that fits within all of your instruction. And we help students make those connections and provide instruction that will benefit them throughout the curriculum across subject matter. So it's not an either or, it's an and both. We have to look at IEP goals and we have to look at the curriculum that students need to master. Ann Binninghoff provides a 7-step process for planning for SDI. And I think she does a great job at making it real and really concrete with direct guiding questions around what you can do in terms of planning for what students need. So the first one is really going back to that learning target, which we touched on a little bit. What do we want students to be able to know or do by the end of the lesson? Not only do you as an educator need to know that, your students need to know that as well. What is the learning target for the student? Then think through, based on your previous knowledge of the student, based on your present levels of performance, based on your knowledge of their processing speed or what you know based on their assessment or evaluation data, what's going to be hard for this student? And you don't have to think of it in one small lesson. In this unit, what's going to be hard for this student? In English, what's going to be hard for this student? So you can look at it on a macro or a micro level, but what's going to be difficult and why? Then you're going to look at what are the IEP goals that I can address within the greater context of this lesson? How is it aligned to the current curriculum being taught? And then how can I address these goals? And I think the last question is so important. If I can address them for this student, are there other students with similar goals that I can lump together and be thinking about all of their goals together when I'm providing that specially designed instruction? Sometimes thinking through the metacognitive processes that happen, sometimes those are innate to us. When we're reading a paragraph and we don't understand it, we stop and go back and reread. But we need to teach that to our students. That teaching of metacognitive processes is also specially designed instruction when planned for. So think about what's going to make this student be successful within this lesson and how do I help them understand it? So if they're not going to go back and reread that paragraph and they're going to finish a whole chapter and not be able to tell you anything about that chapter, how do we stop them? Do we give them Post-it notes and say after every paragraph, you stick a Post-it and tell me what you read? That's a metacognitive process that you're making more tangible for that student. Think about adapting the general approach. So what's the general education teacher doing? And how can I change it up a little bit so that our students can be more successful? Adding in some of those instructional strategies. And there's some examples on the slide. Which approach is going to give us the best outcomes? Again, we only have so much time. So how are we using our time wisely for students? And again, is it going to help some or is it going to help everybody? And how can we apply it to the whole group if this is something that could help everybody? We're going to look at the access skills. What do students need to be able to do prior to obtaining the new standard that's being taught? Are there behaviors in place that we need to look at? Are there executive function skills that students need to have? Think about breaking big assignments into small parts. Are they able to do that? Are they even able to get their backpack with their folder and papers from one place to the other? Or is that what they need instruction on and how to organize themselves? And then finally, the last thing you're going to think about is how am I going to boost student participation? Am I going to look at their interest level? Am I going to look at how do we engage them? How do I help create those relationships between myself and the student, the general education and the student, so that they feel like they can be successful? And then thinking about small group, large group, opportunities to respond, all of those things that our students can be successful. But I really like these guiding questions around planning for SDI. All right, so just a couple quotes by Marilyn Friend to end the section on specially designed instruction. We want to create a balance between the standards to which students are held and their unique learning needs. And this is specially designed instruction is at the heart of what makes special education unique. And that's really what you are bringing to the table as a special ed teacher. You have this skill set to look through on a deeper level of the needs of the student and how we can tailor the curriculum and the instruction in order for students to be successful. All right, we're going to move on to accommodations and modifications. Again, I know this is terminology that you are definitely aware of and implementing on a daily basis. So just a quick overview, and then we'll jump right into an activity. Accommodations really are changing how a student accesses the curriculum, whereas a modification is changing what. So when we're thinking about changing the level of the content that's being taught, we're changing that learning target. If we're changing the goal, then it's a modification. If we are working to level the playing field and remove some barriers for students, then that is an accommodation. So let's go ahead and do another waterfall activity. Similar to what we did for the first one with the multiple choice, but instead of A, B, or C, you are going to type A or M within the chat, A being accommodation, M being modification. But some of these, you might think both. And I'm going to tell you right now that that's not necessarily wrong as long as you're able to justify your answer. So if you put both, we may be talking about why you think that and talk about when accommodations and modifications could potentially be used interchangeably. So let's look at the first one. A ninth grade student is provided a calendar to break down a large project into smaller parts and is provided extended time and a half to complete this assignment. So I see them coming in the chat now. So go ahead and add them. We have a unanimous A for accommodation. Does anybody want to explain why they chose accommodation for this one? You can do it within the chat or feel free to unmute. You're not changing the goal, Dean said. Paige said student output's the same, not changing the assignment, just giving them help and how to manage that assignment. Absolutely. It didn't say anything about changing the large project. It is the large project that is expected of all ninth graders. I am just breaking it down into more manageable portions for this student and really instructing them on how to do that for themselves and providing that extra cushion of time if needed for the student so that they are able to complete the assignment and they see it as not an overwhelming process. It's something that's feasible for them to do. So yes, accommodation on that one. Let's look at number 2. A test is read aloud to a small group of third grade students. What are our thoughts on this one? Go ahead and add it to the chat whenever you're ready. Katie, Dean, Molly, Lisa, looks like everyone's saying accommodation at this point in time. Okay, what's your justification here? Why is this only an accommodation and not a modification? Katie says the content's not changing. So it didn't say I'm giving them a test on second grade standards to a small group of third grade students. It said I'm giving them the test that I'm giving everybody else, and I'm just going to take it into a smaller group. A smaller group's not changing the content. It is changing that instructional delivery model. And we're going to read it to them. Still taking the test, just the group size in a different modality. Absolutely. Okay, I agree with you all on that one. All right, let's look at number 3. A 5th grade student is working alongside peers in the general education environment. The learning activity is based on content connectors aligned to the 5th grade curriculum. Is this an A or an M? Go ahead and enter into the chat when you're ready. Okay, so lots of M's on this one. All M's. All right, and why do you say this is a modification? The content connectors mean content is being modified or changed. Absolutely. So when we're talking about content connectors, they are aligned with the fifth grade curriculum, but they are actually not addressing that level of learning at that fifth grade level at that time. So definitely a modification. Okay, so you know I'm going to throw some tricky ones in here. So let's look at the last two. A student with a learning disability in math is only required to do 10 of the 20 homework problems in Algebra 1. Would you say accommodation, modification, or both? Go ahead and enter in. Some thinking going on here. We have some accommodations. Okay, it looks like the whole group is saying accommodation. Still coming in. Okay, for those of you who put accommodation, which was everyone at this point, why do you say accommodation for this one? Okay, so Paige says if all types of problems are included, the student is still required to know the content, still showing mastery of the content. Okay, I think I know where Paige was going with this. So I would put probably that this could be either. Again, you only have one sentence. Samantha says you can argue it both ways. So if I'm talking about, I think math is an easy way to explain this. If I have an Algebra 1 worksheet and there are 20 problems on the worksheet, and the first 10 cover one concept, for example, solving equation with positive numbers, and the second 10 cover the concept of solving equations with negative numbers. Those are two different concepts that I have to master. So if I give you the first 10 problems and you're not having to do any of the negative numbers, that's not addressing all of the content. So that would be a modification. But if I tell you to do the first 5 in the top section and the first 5 in the bottom section, then you've covered all of the content that's expected of everyone in the class. That is an accommodation. And I think it's so important for special ed teachers to know those learning targets, know what's expected, understand the different types of problems that can be presented to students, whether that's an algebra class or whether that's a spelling pattern on a spelling test, so that you know, is the student exposed to all of the content that Algebra 1 or first, second grade students are supposed to master? So ensuring that the content is met. If you're the one who's saying do this many problems, you need to have a good general understanding of each type of problem that needs to be mastered in order for students to meet the content. So it could be an either or. Samantha, thank you for saying that you could argue it either way. That's completely accurate in this case. All right, the last one. In social studies, an 8th grader studying the Civil War is given 3rd grade level text to learn the content. Would you say that's an accommodation, or would you say that's a modification? Okay. So Samantha has her answer in here. Most everyone's saying modification. Samantha said both. You aren't changing the content itself, but you are modifying the way the content is being presented. Okay, so let's talk about the learning target here. Is the learning target learning about the Civil War, or is the learning target reading comprehension at an 8th grade level? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What do you think? Or maybe you're like, it's one sentence. We don't know what the learning target is. Fair enough. So I'm going to tell you the intent of this was the learning target is knowing and learning about the Civil War, not to assess reading comprehension. So would you say modification or accommodation? Any brave souls? And I did have people in the morning session argue it both ways. So if the student is able to gain knowledge and understanding of the Civil War at the level of his peers when given the third grade level text, I would say it's just an accommodation. However, the pushback this morning was, I can't possibly think that a student could get the same level of understanding of the Civil War without the vocabulary and the level of learning within the 8th grade level text. So again, as a special ed teacher, you have to know what are the learning targets and the outcomes. Does this text support those learning outcomes? If the answer is yes, then it's an accommodation. But if they're able to master the content that the peers are mastering and it's just changing the grade level text, then it is just an accommodation. But if they're not able to grasp those concepts, then it would be a modification. I made them tricky purposely. The first 3 were easy. The last 2 required a little bit more of an explanation. Any questions on that? Any pushback? All right. So let's do one last activity in the 10 minutes that we have left today. And so I want you to consider the information that I'm going to provide you. You are going to read a case study about Jose, and you are going to look at his goals. So the first thing after you read, I want you to think about which of these goals would you address first and why. Then we're going to look at those planning steps on slide 18 and think through different options for content methodology and or instructional design when we're talking about planning for specially designed instruction. And then talk about what accommodations and or modifications might be helpful for Jose. So first off, I'm going to show you the case study, and you're just going to look at, there's 2 goals listed. Which one would you teach first? And we'll just do A or B. A for the first one, B for the second one. All right, so Jose is a new student to you, and you received these goals within his IEP. Would you start working on inferences and evaluating comprehension questions, or would you start working on main story elements? Put A in the chat if you are thinking about the first one, inferences and evaluating comprehension questions, or put B in the chat if you're recalling main story elements. All right, lots of B's. Why do you say B for this one? He has to understand how to find the information in the text before he can infer. Absolutely. So it's definitely less complex, right? We're going to start, if we're going to scaffold some skills here, we got to start with the more basic skills. So we're going to do story elements. So then let's go back to our questions now and think about when you're talking about specially designed instruction, what would you do in order to help a student like Jose master the goal? If we're just talking about the main story elements, how would you adapt the instruction? Think content, methodology, and or instructional design. Yes, Samantha, you could if you chose to write more of an overarching goal with benchmarks. Let me go back to slide 18. What would you think about? So Katie says a graphic organizer. Good. Remember, just handing over the graphic organizer with story elements isn't enough, but teaching to that graphic organizer is absolutely specially designed instruction. Thanks, Katie. Teaching how to story map. Start with passages that are read aloud. Nice. Model what you're looking for. Create drawings to match elements in the story. Absolutely. Flag those elements within the story. Nice answers. Pre-teach story elements. Absolutely. We have to know what a character is before we can find the character within the story. Nice job, Paige. What about those metacognitive processes or executive function skills? How can you embed those within this lesson? Maybe it's ordering those events. Maybe it's simply turning in that assignment as an executive function piece. Maybe it's what it does, like if you've ever seen the chart that is get ready, do, done. And what does that look like for our students so that they know when they've completed each of the story elements? Nice job. All right, the last question on here is all about what accommodations and or modifications might be beneficial to Jose. What would you write within Jose's IEP? extra time. Maybe it's going to take him longer to complete things. Anything else? Highlight story elements while reading. Audio version of the story to help with comprehension. Absolutely. Make sure that he has vocabulary knowledge because he's able to decode. He just has difficulty with the comprehension piece. Access to graphic organizers to organize the information. Nice. All right. Thank you all for participating. I appreciate it. All right. The last thing I want to end on today. Oh, Lisa has a word wall. Absolutely. Allow them to see those visuals up on the wall. All right. So resources that you will have access to. The first one is just considerations for SDI. This is what that SDI checklist is a part of this. I will link this when I send the PowerPoint on to Todd to share with you all. I also want to pick a winner for Specially Designed Instruction by Ann Benninghoff, and I'll mail that to you. I will go ahead and add my name to the chat and pick a number between 1 and 10, Todd or Megan, whoever's on there with me.
I can pick one. 6.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Molly Armstrong. If you want to email me your mailing address, I will send you one of those books. And give me one more number between 1 and 10.
4.
And Katie Smith. If you want to go ahead and email me your address, I will send you a text as well. All right. And it looks like Megan put the exit ticket in there for you. So you have that. And I just appreciate your time. Thank you guys so much for being with me today. And it's nice to be able to now see faces of people who are on. And this is our last session together for this year. So enjoy your spring break. Have a wonderful rest of the school year. And hopefully I'll get to work with you later as well. And please feel free to reach out if you guys need anything, whether that's resources, whether that's just a question. I am happy to help, and I have a team